C5 Z06 in 2022? Is it worth having? This is from the perspective of a blue-collar guy, manual labor job. I'm not one of those garage channels, and this is the best thing I have. This was my dream car in high school, C5 Corvette. I got my first Corvette at 27, ended up wrecking it 8 months later. I was just not ready for that much car. My background is my dad, he never had any muscle cars. My dad always owned Toyota Corollas. I have no idea why I was drawn to Corvettes, because it wasn't like I was raised to love cars, but I learned how to drive a manual in a Geo Metro and then jumped straight to a Corvette after learning manual in a Geo Metro, ended up wrecking it 8 months later. I've had this car for 8 years, so I learned my lesson. I learned how to respect cars a lot more after wrecking my first Corvette. So I've had this thing for 8 years. C5 Corvettes were my dream cars in high school. When the Z06 variant of the C5 was introduced in 2001, it pulled off amazing numbers. This car was faster than the Ferrari at the time, the 360. This car was 50 grand when it came out. The Ferrari 360 was about 125 grand when it was new. Shout out to C4 Corvettes. The C4 generation is the most unloved generation of Corvette. They're starting to get love now. They were produced from 1984 to 1996, second longest Corvette production run behind the C3 Corvette. Almost a 40-year-old body style now, so the nostalgia is really kicking in with those cars. If you have a manual labor job, blue-collar guy like me, and you just really want a Corvette and you want a C4 or a C5 that's in your budget, can't go wrong with either one. It's a Corvette. An observation I've made is C4, C5, and C6 owners, when I'm driving my Corvette, it's like a 95% wave back rating. They'll wave at you, and I always wave back too. I notice C7 drivers don't really wave at you. I haven't ran into a C8 on the road yet. I ran into a C3 driver once, and we talked in the parking lot. Never ran into a C2 or a C1 on the road while driving this car. So the C4, C5, and C6 Corvette owners seem like the most fanatical, like they're the most proud of their cars. It's almost like that generation are the hardworking people, and they're just really into their car, so they wave back. The ZR1 generation, or the ZR1 variant from the C4 generation, was the performance variant of the Corvette at the time, and that was made to be every bit as good as any car on the road. The Z06 is the performance variant of the C5 generation, and for $50,000 it was faster than a Ferrari 360, and there's only a handful of cars that were faster than this at the time. In 2001 it had 385 horsepower. 02 to 04 it had 405. Not many cars with more than 400 horsepower in the early 2000s. One of the cars that was faster than this car was the Viper. This car did a 12.4 in the quarter mile at 116 miles per hour. The Viper did a 12.1 at 121. The thing that dropped the value of the C5 Z06, I bought this car for $20,000 8 years ago. They're still worth $20,000 now. If you get one with high mileage, like 75 to 150,000 miles, you could get one for $15,000 to $20,000. Low miles one, like under 50,000 miles, they go for 25 to 30. And they seem to be stabilized at that price. The thing that plummeted the value of the C5 Z06 is the C6 Z06. So this car did 116 in the quarter mile. The Viper at the time of this car was doing 121. When the C6 Z06 came out, it had 505 horsepower, 100 more horsepower than this car. The reason why this car is not too far behind the Viper, even though the Viper had 100 more horsepower, is the weight. This car weighs 3,100 pounds. The Viper weighs about 3,400 pounds. The C6 Z06 weighs as much as this car with 100 more horsepower. So the numbers on that car were crazy, and they're still crazy to this day. A C6 Z06 will run you about 40 grand, mid 40 grand. If you could find one with 125,000 miles or more for sale, maybe you could get one for $35,000. You could get a C5 Z06 like this one for 20 grand. And if you want to put 9 grand into it, 5,000 for a supercharger, 4,000 for a built transmission, and you run low boost, you could get 600 horsepower for $29,000 if you want to do that. A guy like me, I'm happy with the performance of this car. It has boreless stingers, it has an intake, but other than that, it's pretty much stock. Would I like to put a supercharger on it? Of course I would. But I'm not made of money, and I have other hobbies, and I'm happy with the performance of this car. In fact, this was so ahead of its time when it came out. This has nearly the same acceleration as a base model C7 Corvette. And what's a C7 Corvette cost? That's also a $40,000+ car. So for $20,000, you have just about the same performance as a C7 Corvette. The reason why this car accelerates so well with only 405 horsepower, it's crazy that I'm saying only 405, but that's the times we live in, is because of the weight. That's the magic of this car. It's how much it weighs. 3,150. The C7 Corvette weighs 3,450. It has 55 more horsepower, but 300 pounds more weight, so that's why this car accelerates so closely to a base model C7 Corvette. Not bad for a $20,000 car. A C7 Corvette will also run you 40 grand, like a C6 Z06. So this car is a bargain. You see it all the time. Even big car channels are calling this car a performance bargain. My favorite car review channel, he's also a car salesman, is Curious Cars. He drove a C5 Z06 and he tested a C8 Corvette, and he's having more fun in the C5 Z06 than he's having in the brand new C8 Corvette.
For the love of God, is that fun? Can't even get power to the pavement. We got our performance timer, 0 to 60, accelerate to start.
This car was 50 grand, brand new. A modern sports car that's 50 grand right now in 2022 is the Nissan 400Z. It also has 400 horsepower like this car, and it has similar numbers to this car. So this car is 20 years old and it runs just about the same numbers as a brand new Nissan 400Z. Is the bargain bin retro Z06 worth buying in 2022? The answer is yes. Like I said, I'm a blue collar guy. I'm not a wealthy garage channel. I run a small YouTube channel, and this is the best car that I have. It's outdated now, it's 20 years old now, but even though it's 20 years old and horsepower numbers are going up like crazy, this accelerates nearly as good as a Corvette 2 generations later. Accelerates just as good as a C7 Corvette. Not bad for 20 grand. And the thing with C5 Z06 Corvettes is that they're only available with a manual. So this is a driver's car, and there's nothing more fun than a manual V8 and rear wheel drive. When the thing happened 2 years ago, this place was abandoned. Now it's inhabited again and locked up, but this is where I filmed my intro for this car and did some donuts. This car will casually bust out 150 miles per hour on a Sunday. I should have enough road for 150. So 70 miles per hour. I'm gonna blip the throttle here in a second.